Phryne was an Athenian hetera, the model of Praxiteles and Apelles, born around 390 BC in the small town of Thespia. Plutarch writes that her real name was Yess0rt, remembering virtues, and she received the nickname Phryne, toad, because of the yellowish tint of her skin. This name was also used by other heterae before her. It is possible that the nickname had a protective function, intended to mislead envious dark spirits. Athenaeus, in his book On Courtesans, mentioned that there were actually two heterae named Phryne. One was called Sad Smile, and the other Golden Fish. Rhodius, in the 6th book of On the Characters of Comedy, writes that her nicknames were the Sifter, the Shovel, and the Scraper, due to her manner of dealing with admirers. In her hometown, she was also called Clausa Gellus, from the words cry and laughter, either because of her ability to bring tears and smiles simultaneously or because her laughter made people cry. After settling in Athens, Phryne became a hetera. She became famous as the possessor of the perfect figure. In her youth, she was a model and lover of the sculptor Praxiteles, and in her later years, she inspired the painter Apelles. Apparently, Phryne maintained the beauty of her face and body for a very long time. Plutarch writes that she said, in her advanced age, that she received the highest price from her admirers precisely because of her reputation. Thanks to the gratitude of her lovers, Phryne accumulated a vast fortune. When Alexander the Great destroyed the walls of Thebes in 336 BC, she offered to restore them at her own expense, on the condition that a memorial plaque be placed on the walls. Thebes was destroyed by Alexander and restored by Phryne. However, the Thebans rejected this offer. The Aphrodite of Cnidus, created around 350 to 330 BC, was the most famous statue of the goddess of love in antiquity. Praxiteles was the first to dare to depict her completely nude. The original statue has not survived, only replicas and copies exist. It is believed that Phryne posed for two versions of the statue. One was completely nude and the other was clothed. The latter was preferred by the patrons from the island of Kos, while the nude statue was purchased by the inhabitants of the island of Cnidus. It became the most famous and attracted many pilgrims. According to ancient authors, Praxiteles created the image of the goddess, inspired by his beloved Phryne. This was considered sacrilegious, and one of her rejected admirers, Euphius, accused the hetera of impiety and introducing new cults. In 340 BC, her defender was the famous orator Hyperides, who was also her lover. Seeing that his speech did not make the proper impression on the judges, according to some sources, he tore off Phryne's clothes, while others suggest that she herself bared her torso at his signal. Phryne's beauty made such an impression on the judges that she was acquitted. According to Greek beliefs, such a perfect body could not hide an imperfect soul. Hyperides' speech became so popular that Marcus Corvinus translated it into Latin. It is mentioned in sources that the trial took place before the Athenian jury court, not before the Areopagus, which only dealt with cases of murder. However, in the title of the painting by the academic artist Jerome, the more resonant word Ephesian is used. The defeated accuser, Euphius, was so enraged by his defeat that he never again took on any legal case. According to Hermias, the accusatory speech of Euphius was written by Anaximenes. The comic playwright Posidippus, in his Ephesian, describes another version of her acquittal. The court sentenced Phryne to death, but as she walked through the hall, she took each of the judges by the hand, wept, and pleaded for mercy, which moved the judges. Modern scholars tend to believe that Posidippus's version is closer to the truth, and the story of the nudity was invented later. Once, as a sign of his love, Praxiteles told Phryne that she could choose any of his works. The hetera asked which one was the best, but the sculptor refused to answer. Then Phryne devised a trick. A few days later, a servant ran into the studio shouting that a fire had started. In despair, Praxiteles exclaimed, "If the Satyr and Eros burn, I am lost." Phryne admitted that it was a fabrication and said that she would take Eros for herself. Pausanias wrote that she gave the statue of Eros to her native city of Thespia. Later, the statue was taken to Rome by Emperor Caligula. At the request of the Spartans, it was returned by Nero, but he later took it again. The third statue by Praxiteles, associated with her name, was a portrait statue. After the Hetera's death, almost all of her sculptures were created, one of which was set up by the locals in Delphi on a tall marble column. Not in the temple of Artemis at Ephesus, as is sometimes stated. The statue was either golden, gilded, or bronze, this is assumed. The statue of Phryne in Delphi was dedicated around 346 to 345 BC in gratitude for her victory in the trial. According to Plutarch, the Cynic Crates wrote that this sculpture was a monument to the depravity of the Greeks. Claudius Aelian also criticized the Greeks for this. The statue stood between those of the Spartan king Archidamus, Philip, the son of Amyntas, and Philip II, which appeared quite provocative considering her social status. The inscription on the pedestal read, Phryne of Thespiae, as noted in Description of Delphi and by Plutarch. Another portrait statue was made of marble and stood in Thespia next to Praxiteles' marble Aphrodite and Eros. According to Alciphron, Phryne herself set up these statues between them. This is reported by Pausanias, Alciphron, and Plutarch. The Hetera was known for her unusual modesty, and it was almost impossible to see her naked. She did not attend public baths, wore thick, opaque clothing, covered her hair, hid her wrists, and even preferred to meet men in the dark. Only twice a year during the Eryphaean and Poseidonia mysteries would she stand naked in the temple portico, let down her hair, and walk through the crowd to the sea to offer praise to the gods. As ancient authors recount, this scene inspired Apelles to create the image of Aphrodite emerging from the foam. He painted his famous work Aphrodite Anadyomene for the temple of Asclepius, where the goddess is depicted rising from the waves. The iconography of this painting is believed to have been used by Botticelli in his Birth of Venus. Possible models for this image include not only Phryne, but also Campaspe. Diogenes Laertius reports that the only man who remained steadfast against her charms was the philosopher Speusippus, who led Plato's academy for many years. I awakened feelings in a man, not in a statue, Phryne said after losing the bet. Valerius Maximus describes it as follows. Phryne, renowned in Athens for her lasciviousness, wagered with young men that she could shake Speusippus's abstinence. She spent the night with him, but he remained unshaken. The young men laughed at her, and she defended herself by saying, I made a wager about a man, not a statue. There are many anecdotes about Phryne. Perry, a friend of philosophers, sent her quality wine, though very old, explaining that it was more than 10 years old. She replied, considering its age, there's little use for it. At a banquet, the question arose as to why Phryne hung wreaths on her doors. The answer given was to summon spirits. A condemned man, boasting of his victory in fierce fights, appeared before Phryne. The courtesan, pretending to be sad, answered his question about her reason. I am distressed by how much you had to suffer. Aristogiton wrote a speech against Phryne. Alciphron, the author of Forged Letters, made both her and Praxiteles characters in his stories. In the comedy The Chick by Anaxilaus, there are lines referring to the hetera Phryne, implying her value. In another translation, it says, Phryne, like Charybdis, swallows ships along with the sailors. Timocles, the comic poet, lamented his fate. I was unlucky enough to fall in love with Phryne when she was still gathering capers and not bathing in gold. I went bankrupt bringing her gifts, and now I am exiled. Among the quotes collected by Athenaeus and other ancient authors, there is the story of the Thespian Phryne. When a man began to harass her and then demanded his money back, she responded, You paid me less than what you took from the newcomer yesterday. He who is overcome by lust must wait for the next one and pay the same. Phryne is the subject of many works of art, and she is mentioned in literature, music, and cinema.